Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Technocratic Podcast. Today, our guest is Richard Bullington-McGuire, an architect and distinguished engineer at Moduscreate. Richard has been a leading architect and engineer for more than 20 years. I first met Richard when he was doing a modernization project with me. He came over to help me map it out and figure out the technology strategy. That's when I noticed immediately about his thoughtfulness in the business requirements, understanding about the market before launching into a big modernization. You don't really get that in every architect. He just has a knack for building software at scale that works for customers, and he just is an overall smart guy when it comes to designing systems. I've been looking forward to having Richard on the show, so I'm super glad that he's been able to join us today. Welcome to the podcast, and it's great to have you.
Thanks. It's so great to be here. I really enjoyed working with you on this project, and hopefully we'll get to work on some more things together.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it one day. So Richard, we always do this, or typically we do kick over to Mishka, my buddy in this podcast. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today, but so I'll do the warm-up questions, and I just have a few things to start with. The first one is, I remember you used to be big into cycling to work and all that, like healthy stuff. Are you still doing that? Okay.
Absolutely. So I'm closing in on cycling 1,000 miles this year. I'm within about 21 miles of finishing that out. I'm easy to find on Strava, which I use to track all my cycling activities. And when we were working together, I think that I had just discovered a Washington area community cycling event called Freezing Saddles. Have I mentioned this to you before? Is this familiar? No. Okay. So this is a group of about 250 people who pledge to cycle as much as they can between January 1st and the last calendar day of winter.
Okay.
We track everything on Strava, and we have a website, freezingsaddles.org, which you can go to and check out, that has leaderboards, that has this year maps. Okay.
Oh, cool.
We have beautiful heat maps that are coming this year. It will be available on January 1st. We have a lot of pointless prizes for silly games. So someone might have a prize for who gets to go visit the most fire stations. And if people add a hashtag to their ride, it will show up on the leaderboard. And I've actually been maintaining the technology for this since late 2018. I took over the maintenance of this from the original author, Hans Lillelid, who's brilliant, and but was too busy to run the thing that year. And I'm like, I can't let this program die. This is a beautiful community event that brings people together, and it got my cycling up from an average of about 1 or 2 miles a day up to 10 miles a day while the competition's going on.
God,
so
that's cool.
This year, I cycled at least 10 miles every day from January 1st to March 18th.
That is incredible.
So I met my goal.
Yeah, that's so healthy of you. That's awesome.
What's more, all that software is open source. It's Apache licensed. It's available on GitHub. It's all linked to from freezingsaddles.org.
Cool. So somebody in another organization can fire that up and use it, I guess.
Potentially, though there are issues with convincing Strava that your application is within their API guidelines. There's been a lot of controversy about that this year. I don't know if you've seen any of that. I heard a little bit of it. Yeah. But we actually reapplied for our API key quota and had a successful application right in the middle of the thickest part of their controversy when a very unflattering and critical article appeared, saying they're trying to kill everything. But so far, I think it's going to be okay, and I think that people have maybe overreacted a little bit. Okay. And Strava's also reacting, so it's good.
Good. That's cool. I used to be big into cycling back in the day, and then I just kind of dropped off, so I might look up that. We don't live far from each other. So
that's great.
Check it out. Man.
Sign up next year. We're already over our wait list this year. So we have more than 260 people already signed up, and we only allow 250 people to compete. So
got it. Very cool. And it's all just like road cycling, right?
It's whatever. Outdoors. The rides that count are if you ride a human-powered vehicle outdoors, whether that's a tricycle or an e-bike or a road bike or a mountain bike or whatever, counts for the competition. You ride at least 1 mile a day, you get 20 points. And, each subsequent mile, there's a declining scale to the time while you get to 10 miles. You've earned 65 points in a day. You ride 11, you have 66 points.
Yeah.
So it encourages people to cycle more and more consistently rather than crush it on the weekend and churn out a century and dominate the leaderboard that way.
Right. Exactly. I'm surprised, though, that you guys let e-bikes in.
Yeah, well, it's a human-powered vehicle. And especially as people get older, it gets really helpful to have assistive technology. And this is the great assistive technology that lets people participate in something they love, even if their lungs or their heart or their legs aren't quite what they used to be. And it also is a way to lower the barrier of entry to people who otherwise wouldn't participate. Because cycling up big hills is hard. And it's a major disincentive for some people. They don't want to get hot and sweaty on the way to their destination going to work. So that's a way of helping with that. So we absolutely allow that and encourage it. Indoor trainer rides do not count, though. Mm-hmm. So you can't get on one of those stationary bikes and use one of the fancy programs people do to do their training. It has to be outdoors to count for our competition.
Yeah, I like it. Next year, man. Next year, let me get involved. That'll be cool. I'll get back on the bike.
That'd be awesome.
They're just sitting in the garage right now. Richard, so you kept your health up. That's awesome. Let's talk a little bit about technology and get into some of the topics we wanted to cover here. You're a long-time architect. You've seen many different kinds of systems, all kinds of different platforms, workflows, what have you. Mm-hmm. As an architect, what is your take on how the generative part of AI starts to impact these platforms, the design of these platforms, building these platforms, how engineers use generative AI to create and maintain the platforms? From your vantage point, having seen so many, because you're in a service provider role almost, what do you think is going to happen? What's in store for engineers in that next few years?
That's a good question. It's complicated in that generative AI can do quite a bit when you're dealing with technology, programming, architecture, but in some ways it has a callous disregard for the truth or what is best. Okay. There's actually an essay, pardon my French, entitled Chat GPT is Bullshit, okay, which you can look up. And its thesis is that these systems, while they are facile and produce output that looks like it's beautiful and might be true, it may not actually be true. And this problem was sometimes termed hallucination. And the author of this essay kind of supposes that instead that it is bullshit as defined in the treatise on bullshit, which is actually the last book that my father ever gave to me. It's a philosophical treatise, a little thin book about less than 200 pages long. Yeah. And so you can use these tools, and I have used GitHub Copilot a lot more extensively, especially recently. So I've been a little bit of a late adopter to trying that out, but I've been very impressed with what I've seen in doing small scale limited tasks, such as I recently did a demonstration where I found a program that was a decoder for ISO 8601 duration expressions. But it was in Swift. It was the right type of program. It was actually a parser instead of using something that used regular expressions. Yeah. And I told GitHub Copilot to translate that first into Python, which it did beautifully, and then into Node.js, which it also did pretty well, and had it refine things. So on a small scale, especially if you have a good feedback cycle, some of these systems can be quite powerful. But I think the jury is still out on whether you could use something like that to come up with an architecture that is fit for purpose and that is going to be economical. Because at best, a lot of these large language models can synthesize and regurgitate things that sound plausible. But
Yep.
is it really the right thing for your business? You have to have some expert evaluation in there. It's not enough. If you have people that don't know what they're doing, can't apply that critical filter, I think you could be heading towards a world of hurt. But if you have experienced folks who can edit and judge what the outputs are, and then use that as an accelerator and a kind of a cognitive aid, the same way that we've learned how to use search engines as a cognitive aid, I think that could be useful.
Yeah.
And
that's a good way to phrase it. Cognitive aid. I like that.
There's also a lot of moral, ethical, and legal concerns surrounding the creation of some of these systems, and those concerns do make me uncomfortable and makes me really think twice about, wow, I'm so impressed with the output that I've gotten here, but is the process that arrived at there really the way that we want to be doing things? I have a lot of ambivalence about that as well.
Yeah. Well, it certainly seems like the developer community, software engineers, are embracing AI as an assistive tool. And maybe some of the junior developers out there are sort of relying on it more than they should. I feel like most senior developers I talk to are a little bit more careful, much more careful about it. But you're right. Like at the end of the day, it's absolutely not perfect. And hallucinations still do happen. And, I use ChatGPT all the time for more simpler things in coding, and it gets so many things wrong. And it's not that accurate as one would imagine right now. It does seem like also that a part of it is like, you have to be good at asking it the right questions, framing things the right way. Kind of the sequence of questions has to be good. And the better you get at it, the better answers maybe that come out of it. What's fascinating to me is that it could completely upend our entire industry. When this stuff gets more mature, it's kind of nerve-wracking almost, like, this could replace junior developers maybe immediately right now, maybe senior developers at this time next year. Do you share that concern, or do you feel like, this thing is not going to be that good enough to replace a senior developer at the end of 2025 or 2026 or something?
That's a huge question. I don't think anyone really knows how that's going to go. The jury's still out. It does feel like if I use some of these generative AI assistant tools, it feels like I have a small fleet of junior developers who can very quickly crank something out for review. That's what it feels like to me as an end user.
Yeah.
Am I worried that this is going to replace the kind of expertise that I've been able to develop? Not really. But on the other hand, I read an essay this week that talked about how this is a tsunami, and that folks who are not able to take advantage of this are going to be at a major competitive disadvantage in the marketplace.
Right.
Just as the programmers who thought that handwritten assembly language was always going to be good enough were pushed aside by the rise of structured programming and 3GLs and C and BASIC and Fortran, and folks who
I remember
resisted going to internet for any reason sort of got left behind. Like, I think that the same kind of paradigm shift is underway here.
Yeah.
Nobody really knows where things are going to end up, or how reliable or how capable these systems in the end ultimately might be. So,
yeah. I think I definitely tend to think that it is going to be revolutionary, that it's an even more monumental shift than some of the examples that you gave. Certainly going from assembly to structured programming was huge. I think this will be at least equal to that. And, for me, it was like the first time I actually used it to write a little program, And, it took me a while to get the kinks out, but I was like, okay, well, I did this in a tenth of the time it would have normally taken me to do it. And so there's accuracy, and then there's like the speed aspect of it. Like you said, bunch of junior programmers at your beck and call. It's pretty incredible.
It does make me wonder whether people are going to be revisiting this in the context of the Fred Brooks essay, No Silver Bullets.
Tell us about that.
Okay. So Fred Brooks was the lead architect on the IBM 360 project back in the 1960s. And he wrote a famous essay called No Silver Bullets that talks about how in programming, there's no one thing that he had discovered at that point that would lead to a revolutionary 10x increase in productivity without sacrificing quality. That there's all these small incremental changes that people make along the way that are good, but there's nothing that you can do that says like you can dispense with this entire class of chore or concern as you're going along in the technological spectrum. And people have thought in many, many different times that different technologies or techniques are going to be the thing that is the silver bullet. Is it going to be functional programming? Is it going to be object-oriented programming? Is it going to be, distributed objects? Okay. Remember when that was the absolute hot
Corva.
thing?
You remember Corva?
Yeah, right. Is blockchain going to make everyone's programming life better? But this is one of those big paradigm shifts that is a huge jump. I think it is kind of akin to some of the earlier generational shifts that we talked about, but maybe even bigger. So we just have to see. Now, part of that is it's hard to measure.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like a lot of the work that's being done here relies on qualitative feedback surveys from developers, and that's dissatisfying on some level. It's like, that gives you some information, but how do you quantify this? And it's an open research challenge and an open practical challenge in consulting and in the science that surrounds this.
I see that challenge all the time, where in a very specific way, like you see a lot of development teams, engineering teams who weren't measuring themselves before they adopted generative AI tools, and then they sort of viscerally feel the impact of them, and they have a lot of anecdotes about how much better things are from a velocity standpoint, maybe a quality standpoint, and so forth. But it's hard for them to really prove it. Now, you do have like executives out there that are sort of famous for making big, bold statements. Like, I think it was maybe the CEO of like Klarna or something that said, "Oh, we're not hiring anyone anymore. Like AI is here." In fact, the other day he said, oh God, he took it even further. He was like, AI can already replace engineers, and it's already good enough to be a mid-level engineer, and that's why we're not doing any more hiring. And so it's interesting because it still takes like some level of, let's call it like orchestration, to use AI and align it and point it in the right direction so it builds the software that you want. But if like a dev team or a product engineering team becomes very good at that, and agentic technology next year gets better, then I could see the CEO's kind of vision starting to come true, where he has got a little army of AI agents writing all of his code or whatever. It's not out of the realm of possibility for this to happen next year with a bunch of different companies. Do you agree or no?
I disagree pretty strongly. I think that the hype on this is overblown, that while there are huge gains here, you're not going to replace the judgment and the intent that people bring to this. You're just not going to be able to trust the outputs. Okay. Would you trust a quarter of your net worth to an autonomous AI agent that someone says is trained up to take care of your money today?
Yeah.
Okay, because people are doing, like, if you're a company owner, it might not be a quarter of your net worth. It might be 90% of your net
Whatever.
worth.
Yeah. No, I get
Okay?
the analogy. Yes, makes sense. Yeah.
So if you have, because these systems are also very opaque in many cases, it's very hard to understand how they are making the decisions that they come to. And a lot of these are open research questions, and the industry in many ways is barreling along with not a lot of restraint in these areas.
Oh, there's no restraint at all. It's going berserk. I mean, but here, check this out, Richard. So the other day, I do this experimental project with a few friends, and we were a bunch of folks, engineers, and we said, can we go from a written doc to a beautiful HTML page with a great deal of accuracy? It took us 2 months of collaborating together and working with Claude, and we eventually got it. We created this thing called PageBot, and we have like a spec, and if you write the spec in a certain format, it'll push out HTML pages, and they're like really well formed HTML pages, like as good as any medium developer, good developer. And so we were like, oh, this. So we started building this site, and with like no front end engineer, we're just like it's writing React code, it's writing HTML, CSS, all this stuff. And if we can do that, like imagine what else is happening out there. So
yeah, but that that's a reasonable choice to make, because you worked with people who use those technologies successfully, and like there's a huge body of knowledge out there that people and machines can draw on to work within the boundaries there. But if you needed to do something completely novel, like I have to build an interface for a new direct brain link device that's going to shoot the images straight into my cerebral cortex, there's no program out there that's going to generate that for you at this point. Like, there's so much code out there, HTML code, React code. You don't even need AI to take a pile of garbage HTML tags that somebody wrote and stuck on their GeoCities page once upon a time and turned it into beautiful, valid HTML.
Yeah,
they're programs that deal with sanitizing and formatting things. These are well-known problems overall. Now, architecting it all from scratch, or seemingly from scratch, that's more impressive. But if you didn't have the baseline knowledge to know like how to put that stuff together, it wouldn't be useful to have like someone who is just ignorant of even how these things get piped together say spit it out.
Yeah,
it might spit out what would work, but how do you know and trust that it's going to be even close to what you want? How do you know that there's not a supply chain attack hidden in the middle of it? Okay.
Yeah.
Like there's the deeper you trust this stuff blindly, the higher the risks go in that area. Yeah. And I think we're probably going to see something terrible that none of us expect right now in this area.
There's no question
in the next
about
5
that.
years.
There's no question about that. Do you think do you think all the reasons you've given, do you think those are some of the reasons why like enterprise adoption will be slow for AI?
In part. Yeah, I think that's going to be a part of it. But I mean, I have seen a significant amount of enterprise adoption of things like GitHub Copilot.
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked with very large life sciences companies that use this quite a bit.
Yeah.
So, but the largest companies have guidelines about use of these technologies. They've done some safety studies and have boundaries on what they will allow and what they won't allow, and they're cautious about some of this adoption.
Yeah.
Does that mean they might fall behind to someone else who's less cautious about it? Maybe not. I just don't know. The jury's still out on that as well.
Do you think that Microsoft, because of its partnership with OpenAI and its ownership of GitHub. Do you think that they are basically the de facto leader right now in terms of developer tools, AI-based developer tools?
Well, my primary exposure to these tools has been through GitHub Copilot, and I have a conflict of interest here, given that the company that I'm working with is a Microsoft partner, and I help lead a lot of the most critical GitHub engagements. Okay,
Yeah.
so
hard for you to answer.
It is hard for me to answer. Now, there's good stuff out there that's capable of doing different things, but I just don't have the vantage point to give me the ability to judge that. I think we discussed a little bit ahead of our interview that I'm still mulling over what the right thing and what the technical advantages and disadvantages of some of these things are. And I'm sure that that's going to change as I get more exposure to it and as I see what people are doing with it out there. But I just want to keep a wary eye on the risks and trade-offs here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Completely understand that. Richard, so going to the topic that you wanted to dive into, there's a lot there that we can unpack. And I'm just looking through some of my notes. Winning the software lottery is terrible for your business. I love that line. What did you mean by that?
Okay. What I mean is that sometimes if you have an experiment in the business that I'm working with, that might be building or buying sometimes a piece of software that works really well for your organization and getting it done in record time, implementing your system, having it be cheap. Users love it. It works for years. Okay. This can actually be a long-term trap. Okay. For your organization, because the effort that goes into something like that might be very modest. Okay. Someone builds a piece of software in 2 weeks because they want to get rid of a proprietary piece of software that everyone hates, that's antiquated. Okay. I've seen this happen. Mm-hmm. People love it. They love it for years and years. They love it to bits. They love it so much that they copy and paste it without any source code control, without any sort of awareness of modern programming practices, and create hundreds of different variants of it that operate the company's systems for years and years. But in the end, it leads to an unmaintainable mess that like professional programmers would look at and run screaming in horror about. Okay. And finding out if the company then is like, well, what do we need to do to replace this and do it right? Maybe they hire some people who've had experience in the technology industry, who are capable software professionals, who look at the mess and be like, what can we do about this? And they find out that it's going to cost 10 or 100 times what the development of the original system costs to come up with a replacement that is fit for purpose, modern, secure, performant. Yeah. And that's a terrible thing to happen when you've been relying on something that gave you an unfair advantage, but is at its end of life.
So you're some random company, somebody inside the company builds this product that's pretty sloppy, but it achieves, let's call it product market fit super fast. Maybe it's an internal product, maybe it's an external product. Customers love it, but it's very poorly built. And so, but for a long time, it sustains and helps your business. So you won the lottery in one sense. What's the inflection point at which it becomes more of a pain than a benefit?
So there's a few there. Okay? One can be like technological obsolescence of the platform. Okay. Maybe you built your product in Apple ClarisWorks or something, or HyperCard. Okay, you built an awesome product in HyperCard for Mac.
Cold Fusion.
Cold Fusion. That's actually a great example. Cold Fusion. All right, Cold Fusion is still around. I believe it's still a supported product.
Yeah,
but it does not have the shine that it had back in the year 2000 or 2002, even something like that. Okay. Yeah. I've run into a Cold Fusion product at a company that is an insurance, like they deal with building systems that insurance companies can use to make underwriting decisions.
Okay.
They built a big comprehensive product that was customizable. But if you were a part of the priesthood that knew the domain specific language that they built for this, you could customize this and spit out insurance quotes for automotive and RV and property things all day long. Okay. But the effort that they put into it in building this system in Cold Fusion ultimately led to a dead end where they couldn't hire talent to maintain the system. The particular priesthood of people who understood the domain specific language were dwindling or gone. And their competitors had beautiful drag and drop systems where you could snap things together and build systems that might last. Now, like they came up with a paradigm that allowed them to like customize this and scale it, but only to the extent that they could maintain the limited knowledge base, that was required to do it. And so, this was something I encountered and gave them recommendations on how they might start to remediate this, but it's a big job. So the common thread here that I encounter as a consultant is I would go into a situation like this, assess what's what, say, I've got good news and bad news for you. The good news is there's a way out. The bad news is it's going to be expensive and take a while to do this. And you may have to fundamentally retool. Like you may have to replatform in addition to kind of redoing the way your software works.
Yeah.
And you and I both know that if you have to do a refactoring of a system, if you change one dimension, you're much more likely to be successful than if you have to change 5 dimensions at once.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know what's fascinating about this topic is that I found that you have to really look at it like over period of time. Like after being in the private equity world, you see so many companies that are generating enormous profits on the back of not so great technology purely from a technical standpoint. You're right. Cold Fusion, a perfect example of that. You choose Cold Fusion. It's going to be hard to find people in the States that are Cold Fusion experts as an example of your limitations with that. But if you think about it, that company or these companies that sort of take this approach of slapping something together, they have won the lottery for a long period of time. Like they won the lottery until they haven't, until the complete, and it's actually amazing how a complete reversal of fortunes comes upon them almost. Like they won the lottery for a long period of time. It's been crushing it. Then all of a sudden it's almost like one day, it just almost like overnight. I've seen so many companies just suddenly realize, oh my God, that next level of capabilities we want to go to, or scaling that we want to go to, or partner integrations, partnerships, whatever the need is, all of a sudden we can't meet it. And all those years of winning the lottery now has turned into we're losing every single day in terms of like lost revenue, loss of potential. And then they call people like you and me, and they're like, "Oh, what do we do over here?" And then you have to make them take their medicine. And let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Convincing companies that they should replatform, or whether it's incrementally, big bang, whatever, even when they're faced with the biggest problems in their history, it seems like it's a difficult job. Have you found the same? And maybe what are some of your
it is
techniques?
A very difficult job. Okay. In fact, one of the best success stories that I have is related to the work that I did with Hobson's once upon a time. Really the first wave of work, I think it was, you came on right at the tail end of us finishing that up.
Yeah, it was Navient Student.
Like Navient Student. Like that's one of the great examples of a success story there. Okay. And that was successful because it was limited in scope. We chose 2 dimensions to change, not like 5 at once. Okay. There was a user interface design and refresh component, and there was a language component to it. Okay, and those things got modernized, but it did not try to boil the ocean by completely redoing the data model or the interactions that were there. So that was successful in part because it limited the scope of the change. If you had to rebuild it completely from scratch, it would probably be a much more expensive endeavor. And I don't have any visibility on what happened with that project, for several years. So who knows? Maybe by now it's been completely rewritten and it's beautiful and wonderful. Okay, but I still, as an end user of some of those systems, and I am an end user of those systems, I still see sort of the fingerprints of what we did in that time. So that was a case where it did work out. But I've worked on plenty of projects where it didn't work out, where I work with a very talented team of people. Maybe it's just a couple, maybe it's a dozen people. And we come up with recommendations and proposals to fix the future state, to take into consideration all of the different nuances of both the company's business and what technologies they have and where they could go. And sometimes the organizations decide not to do it or pursue it some other way or go for a much more limited, much more incremental approach, which can be, in some cases, if you're far enough behind the curve, like you may never get out of that trap. Like you may have to shut your doors before you get out of that trap.
Yeah. I think companies are afraid to spend the money because they've sunk so much into the original system, partially because maybe they hear some horror stories of modernizations and so forth. And but it's a tough conundrum for any CEO in a company that's faced with this, because he or she is looking at a product that can no longer do what they need it to do, but trying to fix the situation is like walking a tightrope over like an abyss. Basically, you could fall over at any time, and so most CEOs are not those kinds of risk takers. So they end up constantly talking to people, getting proposals, thinking about it, and then what happens is their tenures kind of wraps up, and they leave it for the next person to sell the company, or there's some kind of event. But some companies are smart. They'll take like an incremental approach. Like you said, they'll focus on one dimension of the problem, fix that, go to the next one, fix that. And if they scope it down small enough, they can kind of pull these things off. But the change management aspect is, to me, much harder than like, what do we do technologically? Technologically, it's now so easy to figure out, okay, how do you modernize various complex types of systems and so forth? There's so much out there. If you don't know how to do it, you can just read about how so many other companies have done it and experts have done it. But the change management part of it seems where you're trying to convince the company that they should spend money on it. But of course, after that, if they do decide to do it, like trying to do things in a new way, whether it's like a new architecture or new dev process or, various other aspects of modernization, it can certainly take companies a long time to like wrap their head about it, because it's weird, because I felt like modernizations were never just technical problems. It's just a lot of people problems, like maybe half or more it's really people. Gosh. It's like tech. It's like people disguised as tech, and then people like you and me become almost like psychologists and psychiatrists for the people in the company. You know what I mean? Instead of technical experts. Yeah.
Conway's law dominates here. So that's the observation that the technological architecture of the systems of a company are going to mirror the human resources organization of that company. And this is often a big factor in these modernization problems, and is often part of why winning the software lottery can be terrible for your business, because one part of the business might benefit hugely from the status quo, where like we have very low cost of producing whatever it is we do, whether it's a good or service, and it's because we have System X, and System X is awesome. But it turns out that System X has some fatal flaw, whether it is maintainability, the underlying technology has been discontinued, is no longer supported by the vendor, or whether it's security. This is often one of the things that is the downfall of some of these systems. Because either the systems get exploited and can't be recovered fully, or there's some major compliance problem. And one of the big problems that I've seen in systems like this is failure to adhere to data protection standards.
That's a good one.
If you have passwords,
that's a great one.
And usernames and passwords for a system that has sensitive PII in it, and you're in the financial industry, okay, and the passwords are in clear text, and people's accounts are in clear text, and maybe their credit card numbers are in clear text. There's so many different standards, like the credit card one deals with PCI information, for example. But there are other standards, that these highly regulated industries have to follow, or they could get fined or shut down. And practically speaking, you're taking a huge risk if you have an unencrypted database of customer usernames and passwords available. And this is one of the things that I've seen in like why people finally wake up and they're like, wow, what are we doing with this system here? I could go into a specific example with the names filed off a little bit here. So I worked with an investment management firm a while back, and this is a serious investment management firm. They had multiple billions of dollars of customer money that they were managing. Now, and to the best of my knowledge, they were very good at what they did. They had a lot of clients that you and I would recognize, but their receptionist built their internal CRM using Microsoft Access. Now, a dozen years maybe before I arrived on the scene. And this receptionist's parent also helped build it. So they built it quick. They built it cheap. It was awesome. It tracked everything that you needed. And you can build great systems in Microsoft Access that are limited purpose, don't need to be internet exposed, internal systems. I've done it myself. I've built a preschool student information system in Microsoft Access. Okay, it worked great. I think it's still in production, even though my oldest child who is in the school there is now 23. Okay. But when you do this for an investment management company, there's a higher standard that you need to adhere to. Even if you build the best custom CRM possible, if eventually you figure out a way to hook that up to the web, and then have your usernames and passwords for your customers sitting in there in clear text, that's a huge risk that you're taking. Okay. And it's pretty funny what people's usernames and passwords are when you get to read them out in clear text.
It is funny.
Okay. It's way more predictable than you'd expect, and there's way more use of off-color expressions and things that should not be in the passwords that you might expect. So seeing this is one of those clear signs of like, we have to do something about this. We can't leave this system as it is. And if you've already integrated one of these systems, these lottery-winning systems, hey, building this let us avoid dealing with this problem for a decade. And now it's time to rebuild. It might be shockingly expensive. The vendor that this investment management company used for their fund accounting systems, which was a great, normal, respected company in the industry, wanted $30,000 a month for their CRM module. Okay. This whole system's entire maintenance and support and creation costs were almost certainly less than $30,000. And now this company wants $30,000 a month to license, a system that is well-designed, hooks in with the investment management stuff, and is fit for purpose, and is supported by the company that also handles your customer funds, at least, how to do all the orders for that. Like that would be the no-brainer choice of like, let's just do this, except that it was so expensive compared with what they paid the first time.
Yeah.
What are you going to do when you're faced with that? But you have billions of dollars of customer funds at stake. If you really screw up and someone manages to get into your systems and find a way to use your other systems against your customers and against you, that would be catastrophic. So
Yeah, that's a good example. Very good example. One thing you said was sometimes, and I've seen this too, where you have this kind of rinky-dink system. It's not preferred by the product and engineering team, but the sales team and some other part of the business loves it because it's throwing off all this revenue. And you sort of have this contention between some part of the business versus another part of the business about what to do with this platform. The CEO is caught up in between those groups, and sometimes doesn't know what to do. When that's the case, what's your recommendation? What should the framework of thinking be, for example, for a CEO when there's a product that's generating a ton of revenue, but it's technically terrible, tons of security problems, potentially compliance issues, maybe its maintainability is getting harder and harder every year, but sales loves it. What should a CEO do?
Well, I think you have to hit them with the risk profile, because CEOs are often good at loss avoidance. They want to know what can we do to have an edge over our competitors to avoid getting sued and to be able to have a good story to sell. Like, being able to sell is super important in technology. Like, you can have wonderful technologists that can't sell, and they might build the best system in the world for whatever it is they're doing, and it won't get any attention. Okay, so you have to balance this, but it's the risk profile there that I think is something you have to do, because computer security, you have a four-legged table, or however you want to put it, about the factors you do. You have the technological factors, you have insurance, you have contracts, and you have legal remedies. Okay, and you can address computer security issues with any one of these dimensions, and the same is sort of true on the when you're dealing with kind of the factors about system renewal or replacement, because in the worst case, you have to fall back on insurance or on legal, but you don't want to have to use those. You want to be able to either spend enough money to refactor your way out of it, or have a replacement system, or failing that, have contracts in place that dump the liability onto your partners or absolve you of liability. So you've got to reach into that toolkit, and really it's the risk. It's like, well, what is our maximum loss here if this screws up? If we have a major outage that harms our reputation, what is that going to do to our business? Do you want to take that risk? Do you want to explain to the board that we failed to act for multiple years? Do you want to have shareholder lawsuits coming after you because you were negligent? Probably not.
Yep. And Richard, what about when we go back and look in our career? There's so many kind of like situations where modernization was a big part of like what we were asked to do, and then over the years you had people like the guy who started Stack Overflow. I always forget his name, Joel something or another.
Joel Spolsky.
Spolsky, yeah, talking about like, you should never modernize and stuff. After all these years, you and I also used to talk about this stuff. Where's your head on that? Like, should companies ever really modernize, or is it better just to incrementally refactor and sort of take it step by step? And do you have any philosophy on that? Is there the universal framework for thinking about that, or what do you think?
Well, if you can keep up the effort to continually refactor, I think that generally it's better, until there's some huge paradigm shift in the way that you do business. Okay, like if you're a company that is doing customer service and helping to register people for an event by mail, and all of a sudden people start using the telephone more, you better adapt and start building telephone systems. Okay, or going to the internet, or like you have to adapt to what the marketplace conditions are. So if there is a marketplace shift so that the rationale and value of your product is no longer any good and you can't refactor it, maybe now is the time to embark on kind of a next gen thing. But generally, if like what the market demands and your offering is good, it's generally better to continually refactor.
Mm-hmm.
And the longer you put it off, the bigger the chances are that you can't do it anymore, that you will have to start over, either by buying some piece of technology or building. And it's not just it's not just building stuff where you can win the software lottery. You might have bought something that lets you be competitive for a long, long time. But then eventually you can't get it to run on your systems anymore. Vendor's long gone. Maybe the people that wrote it are dead. That happens a lot in legacy software these days. You have mainframe and mini computer systems where the people that originally wrote the software are long gone. Okay. And these systems may be fit for purpose, but are they flexible and adaptable enough to meet your changing business conditions? Answer is usually not, without great expense.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you, do you feel like companies should take the time to build business cases for this stuff? So they're contemplating a modernization. Should they build a business case for it? Or should it be more, hey, just trust the CTO, trust the engineers, do what they say in a certain kind of, over a course of some time, but what's the right approach to sort of the business case aspect of it? Is it worth doing them or not really in your experience?
Well, the big question is, are people going to listen to it? Is it going to change anything that happens? Okay, because in a lot of businesses, there's a lot of control that's concentrated at the very top in either one person or a small number of executives. Okay.
Right.
And in closely held businesses like that, I think it's very difficult to apply kind of like, oh, let's build a formal proposal and make a business case to do it. I think that in larger organizations, it's probably, you probably have a better shot at that. Now, if you're a CTO and you're trying to figure out what is it going to take for me to both maximize the opportunities that I can help bring to the table and minimize the risks of operating a complex interconnected set of systems and programs, like you need to have some kind of baseline budget, because if you don't, people are going to spend it anyway, but it's going to be all emergency, break fix. Like, why do we have so many people doing this? Well, we had customer outages last year that were revenue affecting. Okay. So you're going to have to spend some of that money, some of those resources, some of that time that you can't get back, one way or the other, if you have a business that is highly technology dependent. So I think it makes more sense to be somewhat mindful about it. Having a big formal plan might not be as useful as having like really well-oiled processes and a culture of getting things fixed, like, in time to do it, that is effective. And like what that mix is going to be different for every organization, for every mix of technologies. That's one of the reasons why folks who worn a CTO hat are constantly in demand. And I wore that hat starting pretty early in my career, and periodically I have to put it on and play CTO as a consultant. So,
yeah. What happens in companies, it seems like, is at the start of the business's life cycle, they have this like tremendous amount of creativity, and they're building their products, and whether it's well built technology or just slapped together, the use cases are so clear to them, and they build these products that are so aligned to those use cases, are getting product market fit, and everything is great. They've got the mojo, they're doing what needs to be done, and it's working great. Then fast forward, and now that thing has grown to like a behemoth, that original technology or platform, and they kind of have lost their mojo. Maybe the founder's gone, maybe the original developers who had all the ideas are gone, and now somebody else is shepherding that platform. How does a company like that get its mojo back? How does it get its innovation back or its creativity back? Because you see a lot of businesses, they're still spending the same amount of money they've always spent in product and engineering. If you look at their budget, it's usually number 2 product engineering after sales, in like a B2B SaaS company. They're still spending the same $30 million that they were spending every year for the last 10 years on it, except in the first couple of years, it was resulting in tremendous amount of growth. The last 2 or 3 years hasn't done anything. How does a company like that sort of reinvigorate itself when it comes to product and engineering and their platform?
I think the classic answer to this is now older than both of us, which is the skunkworks approach. Okay. And I think that is probably the one that ends up being the most successful, where you have a team, you have them work with relative isolation and independence from the rest of the organization. They do their thing. They're not bound by the kind of pressures from the current business development folks. You have to have enough room and runway to do that. Okay. So I still think that that's probably the best bet for doing that. It's really hard to work against that institutional bias of like our BD people know how to sell, product X. They're happy with product X. Why are you coming up with product Y? We don't know if that's going to sell at all. Okay. So having something that has some independence, I think is probably still the best bet.
Yeah. The skunkworks thing I've seen work a bunch of times. I mean, it can fail too, just like anything else, but
it's a high risk, high reward play.
It's a high risk, high reward thing. I've also seen some companies who have taken their platforms and their, let's call them legacy platforms, and handed them to some offshore team, and the offshore team maintains it, and then their US team just goes bonkers making the new system. And it seems like even when it works, when all this skunkworks stuff works from a technological perspective, you then hit the next thing of, again, we're back to change management, where like, all right, now the sales team has to actually learn how to sell this new thing. And then half the time they don't want to do that. They're like, where's my old thing? What are you trying to do? Trying to make me lose my commission checks? And so you enter into this change management thing. Have you found that there's some techniques to getting the rest of the business on the same page or aligned with the new version of your product, the next generation version? How do you convince sales to sell this new thing? I don't have a great answer for that one. I've had way more experience with institutional resistance, having Conway's Law slap it down. The department that deals with one aspect of the business doesn't like the other department, and so it doesn't work. I wish I had a great answer on that one, but I don't have the best comprehensive answer. I think in part it has to do with shifts in who's responsible. Sometimes the people who are doing it have to change. That's probably the most likely way of doing it. You have to, if you have to get out of Conway's Law, you have to reorganize. Okay? Really, like the problems and the divisions in your technological systems your problem is probably down to the people and what they're used to. And you may need to get new people involved, or you may need to promote people whose ideas have been, neglected or set aside to give them a shot. Yep. Find something else for the people who are super comfortable to do. If you can. That actually reminds me of this question I wanted to ask you about innovation. I just have this pretty simple definition of innovation, and I was referring to it at the start of a company's life cycle. If there's a 10-year-old company around, they did something right, and it's usually all the right thing were in the beginning, after they made their mistakes, obviously, but they did some product innovation and they got some product fit at some point. But they were innovating at some level at that point, and it was probably building new things in a unique way and that sort of thing. is the only way to get innovation back after it hasn't been around in a company for years and years, is the only way to get it back to bring in new talent? Or like, can you actually to like teach an old dog new tricks in terms of technical innovation? What do you think about that?
It's easier to bring in new talent, I think. But if you have folks that are sufficiently motivated and you can give them the space that's required, they could take a shot at it. Okay. I don't think necessarily you built one system and that's all you're ever good for. And now that you're no longer useful to us, we're going to, throw you on the ash heap of history. Okay. Is a great corporate philosophy. You're not going to get people motivated to work with you if you can't take care of people in the long run. Okay. But people do have to be willing to reach out and expand and change. Okay. Not everyone is cut out for that. There's an anti-pattern that comes into play very frequently, which is called the dungeon master anti-pattern. Okay. Where if you have one person who designed and built your systems or was the primary architect, and they gained great favor and power by building one of these systems that's fit for purpose, works well for a long time. Maybe they didn't use all the best practices that the industry has to offer. Maybe they took some shortcuts. And, this is their baby. This is the thing that's made them their career. I've seen this with companies where someone's been doing this for 35 years. Okay. And they are the person. And if you want to change any of those systems, it has to go through them. They have to personally approve every pull request. Okay. And in a situation like that, I don't know how you can make progress without at least adding other people that have parallel or similar control and power and influence. Okay. But that's when people aren't willing to change and adapt. Okay. Like I think it is definitely possible for folks, if they've been exposed to, like a new problem and new techniques and, new ways of doing it, to shift and say, all right, I'm going to take on a different type of role than what I've been doing before, or I'm going to try, building something with this. We can let somebody else maintain what it is, or just let it go, know that it's legacy, have an ultimate shutdown plan for it. But it's hard. It is hard to do.
Very difficult.
So I think it's not impossible, but the odds are kind of against you, both as an organization that has a problem like that, and also as someone who's built some of those systems.
Why do you think so many very, very good companies, this is kind of a funny question, but why do so many great companies that even have good technologists, why don't they build software more frequently that is actually maintainable, scalable, all that stuff? I know some really smart people who are like, you know what, Bobby, we're going to use Ruby on Rails. Now, I don't have anything against Ruby on Rails, but I always ask the question, like, 5 years from now, how big do you want the engineering team in the States to be? Because if you use Ruby on Rails, or like we were talking about earlier, Cold Fusion, that's going to be tough, man. Why do so many technologists do make those kinds of decisions, in your opinion? The ones that, like, basically unscalable long-term decisions.
There are times when certain technology stacks, certain approaches have a big advantage over some of the competition. Okay. And for whatever window that is, it's very shiny. It's very attractive. It feels liberating to deal with, a system or framework where the concerns that dragged you down in building the previous systems are no longer a big problem. Okay. But these things go in cycles. What works now, what's effective now, what gives you leverage now over what might have given you leverage a couple of years ago, this changes every 3 to 5 years. Okay, so if you made the decision to build your systems in Ruby on Rails in 2008, like, it might still be working out beautifully for you. Okay, I can think of multiple public companies or companies that were acquired by public companies that started out like that and still have a core that is like that. Okay, and they have global engineering teams, um, but you might end up in a in a bubble that starts shrinking, and that's one of the really hard things. Like if you use a niche research language for your production systems, you're only ever going to be able to employ the people that are in that very tiny community, or you have to train the people who come in to do it.
Yeah.
And I think this is
You can pull off Ruby
ultimately
on
kind of a
Rails.
trap.
Yeah.
What now?
I said you can pull off Ruby on Rails, but it is a trap, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a psychological aspect of a lot of engineering leaders, and they're leaders. They're not individual contributors necessarily. They're leading people. They're leading technology decisions. And I don't think they think enough in terms of business. I think they're really enamored by the technology. That's not to say that Ruby on Rails can't even succeed in this day and age, but it depends on what your parameters are and what your goals are in the company. I think engineering leaders should think more hardcore about what those goals are, business goals. Richard, a couple more questions for you, just along the same lines of winning the lottery and thinking you won the lottery until all of a sudden you've got some serious problems on your hand. When you look at these larger scale platforms where there's a lot of interconnected and disparate systems, some parts of the systems it may be well architected, scalable, maintainable, all that stuff. Other parts of the system may have been jury-rigged together. And in scenarios like that, what kind of strategy do you kind of espouse for sort of like addressing that kind of situation? Because a lot of times if you try to mess with the jury rig part, you impact other reasonably good parts. And, I have a lot of conversations with CTOs where it's like, well, Bobby, if we're going to change this over here, we got to touch these other 15 parts over here. Let's not try to do this at all. That kind of thing. Do you run into systems like that?
Oh, yeah.
What do you do in situations like that?
Definitely I've run into systems like this, and it can be very touchy to manipulate these systems. So I think that the best advice that I could try to encapsulate is almost entirely contained in Marianne Bellatti's book, Kill It With Fire, which is all about
That's a great
legacy
name.
system modernization. And now that's the catchphrase that people use. Oh, it's just too crufty. We have to kill it with fire. But the reality is that some of these systems that have major flaws are also very useful, and it is related to winning the software lottery. Maybe the core of whatever it is, it ends up making tons of money for you because it's very good at what you're doing. Like if you're a bank and you're trying to lend people money, or a non-bank financial institution, your credit modeling facilities may be like that. Okay. And I've seen systems that are proprietary that do this. And I've also seen commercial off-the-shelf systems that do this. And some of them are awful in many different dimensions. And I'm not going to name names and shame here, but my all-time least favorite piece of software in the world is a credit decision-making system that is commercial off the shelf. Okay. And I really don't like so many different aspects of it, but it's my absolute least piece of favorite. It's my absolute least favorite piece of software in the world. So
just the name makes me believe you.
Yeah. So what you have to do is you have to make these systems testable. You have to isolate these systems. You have to build reliable interconnections between them, encapsulate them, and then you can figure out how to replace them. The strangler fig pattern is one way that these systems can be contained. I actually advised applying that pattern in the work that we did together.
Sure, I remember.
And our colleague Matt Morgan wrote very eloquently on that in his essay on figs and apples. So I think that there are great legacy modernization stories out there. If you have to find the part that is truly valuable and then find a way to carve away the non-functional aspects of it that are not valuable. Okay. maybe there's a way to put in a modular replacement for something like that. Maybe it's not even something that you build custom. Maybe it was a bad idea, or maybe it's a bad idea to rebuild it from scratch in the modern day when you could purchase something, okay, or outsource that entirely to somebody else. It really depends. So the right answer, there's not a universal right answer there. That's just something that people who have good engineering judgment, good business judgment, the combination of those, they have to work together to figure that out.
Yeah. Very good answer. Got one more for you, Richard, and then we'll wrap up. When you think about systems where modernization is on the table, and you're thinking about, you're the CEO or the CTO, and you're thinking about, what do I do? Have we gotten to a point in the software industry generally where there's enough third-party software and just generally like highly sophisticated platforms out there like Salesforce, where the difference between building it custom versus buying it has sort of the gap is closed, meaning like historically, in my experience, oftentimes engineers, CTOs, so forth, want to build their own software because the thing that's out there that's commercially available isn't exactly going to do what they want. There's going to be a lot of customization needed for it. That has software. You just look at Salesforce and how powerful it is.
Sure.
We might hate the cost of Salesforce. We might hate the Apex programming paradigm language in it. We might hate whatever about it, but there's no question that it is extremely capable. Should a company that is thinking about redoing its enterprise software think about doing it through third parties and buying now instead of building it custom?
That's a great question. And I think what you have to look at is like what sectors does software exist in where it's more capable than what you could possibly build up from scratch that you can take advantage of. Okay, CRM is a great example of that.
Mm-hmm.
General purpose business accounting software is a great example of that. It used to be very common for almost every company that used computers and computerized accounting systems to build their own accounting system. Why would you do that? You have to have a very good reason to do that today. Okay. And some organizations do have very good reasons to be very particular about some of their core systems. Okay. Mm-hmm. But this is also one of those things that is covered by the principles that Geoffrey Moore set out in Dealing with Darwin, where you have core activities that your organization does that are valuable to it, and there's context. You have to do these things to stay in business. There's things that are mission critical, where like these things are like, if you don't succeed in these, you're gonna be in trouble. And there's non-mission critical things. Mm-hmm. So your core mission critical areas are where you should focus the most. And I think this is great advice that still holds today. So if your software is in your core mission critical domain and there's no commercial alternative out there, and this does happen very frequently. This is one of the reasons why companies, organizations build custom software and systems, because nothing out there will do exactly what they need in a way that's going to allow them to be competitive and stay in business. But you don't need to build your own accounting system. Maybe you need to do a lot of integration in your accounting system. Maybe you need to integrate it with multiple CRM systems from multiple companies you've acquired. Okay. It can be complicated, but that's context. Okay. Some of it's mission critical, not all of it. Okay. So you have to pick and choose as an executive, as a technology leader, very carefully, like where you're going to invest. And there are places where doing it yourself and building it from first principles is sometimes the right answer. But you have to be very careful about that decision, because otherwise you can spend unlimited funds building something that doesn't deliver any distinguishing differentiation for your organization.
Yeah. That's great advice, Richard. I think we're at the end of our time, though. It was a pleasure talking with you today.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much.
I always learn so much from listening to you, and I'm sure our listeners will have taken a lot from this discussion. I want to thank everyone for joining, and I'll see you next time on the Technocratic Podcast. In the meantime, keep the sharks swimming.